What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about Magic the Gathering, the popular trading card game. That's right, everyone. This is transferring from a Warhammer 40,000 focused miniature gaming channel to talking about the world's most popular card game. I'm just kidding, obviously. Got it! We're still a 40k channel, but Warhammer 40,000 is joining the illustrious pantheon of settings available to play in Magic the Gathering. So we get to talk about a card game on this 40k channel. Recently, Magic the Gathering, or MTG, has begun including other IPs in its products, with a program called Universes Beyond. This makes bespoke card decks for other IPs to play in casual or eternal formats. This means that these cards won't see play in normal competitive formats like Standard or Modern, but are legal for Commander or formats where cards don't rotate out of legality. I actually made a video about this development back when Magic the Gathering started including non-MTG properties in secret layer releases, starting with AMC's The Walking Dead, admittedly bizarre inclusion in the MTG collection. It's been an interesting story to watch develop and is culminating in the upcoming release of new Commander decks for this channel's favorite IP, Warhammer 40,000. These are pre-constructed decks themed around the different factions of the 41st millennium. One for Imperium, Chaos, Necrons, and of course my favorite, Tyranids. Now, to preface this whole video, I haven't personally played Magic the Gathering in quite a while. I got pretty competitive over lockdown on Magic the Gathering Arena, pushing myself to Platinum, drafting, and playing burn decks in Standard before I got bored and went to go do anything else. So most of my very limited experience has been with competitive play, and I'm certainly not an expert in the system overall. If you want someone to dive into the metagame implications of all the cards that we talk about here in their respective formats, I highly recommend checking out Pleasant Kenobi's coverage of the MTG 40k decks. He is both a 40k and Magic the Gathering player, and so meshes his discussion about the two properties together in a really good way. But today I wanted to briefly talk about these Commander decks and the designs that make them so cool from the perspective of a mostly 40k player, with an emphasis on Tyranids, obviously. The Warhammer 40k decks are designed for play in a format called Commander, where a character card is chosen to be the leader of your forces, and unlike other creatures in the game, can be recurred when killed to continuously apply their synergies to your deck. In this way, players will build decks around their commanders with the knowledge that they'll always have access to cast them and make use of their unique abilities. Each of the 40k decks is built with a distinct mechanical identity. The Imperium is led by Inquisitor Greyfax and tries to span lots of bodies, each drawn from the Imperium's vast supply of unique military regiments like Catachans, Death Corps of Krieg, or different Space Marine chapters. Chaos is led by Abaddon the Despoiler and is all about chaining together random effects and card draw for some huge payoffs, and generally creating chaos around the battlefield. Wild card, bitches! Necrons are led by Sarek the Silent King and are consumed by manipulating their artifacts and resurrecting their creatures or unearthing them from the graveyard once they're killed. While Tyranids are led by the Swarm Lord and focus on growing huge swarms of enormous creatures. Each of these factions broadly nail the flavor of their tabletop 40k counterparts, so I guess it's a good time to talk about exactly why I love the art of Magic the Gathering's design. MTG is probably the most heavily designed game in human history. Sure, it's not as old as a classic like Monopoly or chess, I guess. Maybe the game.
They have a go, the next minute they're all betting, the next minute having a fight, two of them in hospital. So it's a good, healthy activity.
But those games are static and unchanging. Chess has never gone through a re-release where the abilities of the pieces are changed, and the core mechanics of Monopoly have remained relatively the same for its many-decade existence. On the other hand, Magic has employed dozens of designers for almost 30 years who have collectively written, play-tested, revised, and printed over 20,000 individual playing cards. This means that likely tens of millions of man-hours have gone into the design of the game of Magic the Gathering in its most current format, and that collective design experience really shows in more modern products. Miniature games, especially 40k, always lean towards a very heavy top-down design principle when making rules to use with their models. A man with a gun has a stat line somewhat consistent of what a man could do in the background of the game, and the gun does a thing that a gun does.
Goodbye,
While the miniature gaming industry is slowly moving away from this admittedly stifling method of design, 40k has staunchly refused to budge for almost 40 years. A design in this way is like trying to simulate a fight on a tabletop by incorporating semi-realistic stat blocks, at least that are justified in the lore of the game, while simultaneously forgetting that it's supposed to be actually developing a game, not a really awkward historical reenactment.
They got me, gal!
A card game, however, doesn't have these predilections. Card game designers are artificially restricted by the medium of the game. They have to work harder to capture the flavor and abilities of their subjects in that game mechanically. And that's why I love these Warhammer 40k cards and a lot of the design of Magic the Gathering in general. And in this case, especially the decks constructed around them. So for an example, let's talk about Tyranids. In the lore of 40k, Tyranids are typically preceded by the Genestealer cults, who prepare worlds for consumption by the Tyranid swarm. Once the Tyranids touch down, they disgorge from their hive ships, consume the local biomass, and grow rampantly in numbers until their waves of attack are endless and innumerable. In MTG, the economy of a deck is determined by its lands. These are cards that typically have no other effect than providing you 1 point of a special resource called mana. This mana can then be used to cast larger and larger spells or summon larger creatures as the game continues. That said, sometimes the creatures that you spawn with that mana also have the ability to generate mana themselves, allowing you to summon even larger creatures sooner than you would normally be allowed just using lands on their own. This is the role of the Genestealer cultists in the Tyranids deck. They generate mana, allowing you to spawn larger swarms of true Tyranids as quickly as possible. Casting them early in the game literally means that you're preparing the battlefield for the arrival of the larger Tyranid organisms exactly as they operate in the lore. But what do you get when you spawn these creatures? The Tyranids deck is characterized by a unique ability called Ravenous, which allows you to pay more mana to make your big monsters in large swarms even larger when you cast them. Once the Tyranid Assault hits its critical mass, the hive ships have enough material to recycle their biomatter endlessly and spawn waves upon waves of new organisms. This is represented by the Ravenous ability drawing you a card if the cost you paid for that ability is high enough. These Tyranid organisms literally replace themselves in your hand once that critical mass of mana generation is met. The overall identity of the Tyranid faction in 40k has been expertly captured by the MTG R&D team. A well-oiled machine of rampant growth, consumption, and repopulation. And while I haven't delved quite as deeply into the mechanics of other decks, I'm still sure that similar representations are there. And that's in addition to pretty cute flavor additions that accentuate the card's representation of their background material. For example, the Swarmlord respawns after being killed and retains the memories and knowledge that it gained over its previous lives, and as such, gets more powerful the more times you summon him during a game. Dreadnoughts are piloted by wounded Astartes and let you stick injured fighters into their sarcophagi, often getting bonuses based on the skill of the warrior interred within. Imperial Commissars let you sacrifice troops to gain life, literally reinforcing your morale by executing the weakest members of the unit. Great Unclean Ones affect your opponents with disease and make you more powerful the weaker that disease makes your opponent, and Primaris Eliminators can inflict thematic effects on your opponent's units based on the ammo type that they load into their bolt snipers. The list goes on and on, with the thematic identity of a staggering range of units from Warhammer 40,000 represented expertly on each of their cards. And while it isn't all perfect, some of the abilities and synergies don't quite make sense. Triac Praetorians, for example, have an ability flamered as being a dynastic protocol, despite not actually benefiting from those in the game. The Red Terror triggers its ability off red creatures, but the Raveners it's supposed to be leading are blue-green, so they don't trigger its ability. And Suppressing Fire is represented by drawing a card for some reason. But over the course of 150-ish cards, these nitpicks are pretty few and far between. Game design is a topic that is endlessly fascinating to me, and MTG has some of the cleanest and most interesting in the entirety of the games industry. In my opinion, if you're a designer for any variety of game, studying Magic the Gathering and how it captures the flavor with just a few sets of numbers and maybe 1 or 2 abilities is absolutely critical for enhancing your craft. The way these Warhammer 40,000 decks mesh in a mechanically interesting way that captures the flavor of the 41st millennium even better than anything Games Workshop itself has ever done is just amazing. And I'm excited to get some games in with my local group on my own. Let me know down in the comments what you think about these Warhammer 40,000 decks. Do you like the decks themselves? And do you like the idea of universes beyond? I know it's a pretty controversial thing in amongst the Magic the Gathering sphere, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. This video wasn't sponsored or anything. I really just wanted to talk about how interested I am in these cards, but if you want to support the channel, you can do so in a couple different ways. You can support me on Patreon over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. YouTube channel members get a bunch of bonuses and help support the channel. You can join them in the link down below the video. And Twitch subscribers over on the purple channel. You guys are awesome. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks to everybody who supports the channel. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.